Alrighty. Good evening, everybody. Yo, I'm glad that we are all here tonight. Good evening. This is my third Geocon quick take. This is Mark 2 of my Geocon quick take. Hello, chat. It's kind of interesting because on StreamYard, here we go. There are 4 people so far. Hi, Fritz. A little context behind this stream. First off, this is my third quick take. Quick takes are essentially on my sorry, a little something in my throat. For those of you who don't know, quick takes are essentially on my channel are essentially where I have a live stream conversation and I just sort of rant off the cuff. You know, I just go on about whatever topic. And a little bit of context. So a few months ago, I made a live stream quick take on the topic of Neo-Absolutism and its relation to a video that Distributist had recently made about new atheism. And I made certain arguments in that video. And for whatever reason, YouTube decided to take down that video. I have no idea why. All it said is I violated terms of service. I didn't even get an email saying that YouTube had taken down my video. It just took it down. I don't know why, but they just did. So that's kind of disappointing, but I hope to make that up for you guys. I'm going to be sort of redoing that live stream better than ever, right? I'm going to be more focused. I have a script out in front of me, basic guidelines, or rather it's not a script so much as like basic guidelines of what I want to do. I do have my dog in my room, so while I'm doing this, so bear that in mind while I'm doing this. He might make some noise. Hey Max, don't worry. I'm going to, after this live stream, I'm going to download this video so that YouTube won't be able to delete it off the internet anymore. That's what I've been doing ever since I found out about this video. I've been downloading all of my videos on my channel onto my computer, and I'm planning on uploading them to Bitchute, to my Bitchute account. And I'll post the link to my Bitchute account after the live stream. So be sure to look out for that. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about something that it's sort of an interesting theory, and it's probably one of the most promising intellectual things to come out of the dissident right in the last few years. It's exactly the kind of thing that right-wingers should be looking out for. It's something very new and fresh, but at the same time, it uses old principles and doesn't assume liberalism out of the gate. In short, it's something called Neo-Absolutism. Now, Neo-Absolutism has a lot of components to it. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to it that have gone into it. The people behind it are those at Generative Anthropology blogs, someone like Adam Katz, Chris A. Bond, a Catholic writer, Joel Davis, who is kind of a postmodernist type of guy, and in general the people at what was the Imperium Press? Right, that's the name of it. Right. So I'm going to show you the. I'm going to show you right now the Imperium Press. You can let's see, share. Let me share with you the. Hold on. Share. Let's see. Share screen. Share. Right. So you can see here, Imperium Press. Right. So this is kind of a kind of dissident right classics department sort of deal, and they want and they're here to put a lot of older books as well as some new releases and publish them onto their company. Like they have a copy of The Ancient City, Anthropomorphics, which is a book on generative anthropology. That's pretty good. See Chris Bond's book, Nemesis. They have copies of the Iliad and Homer, all kinds of things. All right. So that's the sort of stuff that they publish. And it really, and this is in a way their brainchild. The brainchild of Chris Bond and that kind of crowd. Now, but enough about introducing who they are. I'd like to really focus on what is behind the intellectual ideas of this kind of thing. There's this thing called Neo-Absolutism. It sounds kind of scary. I mean, the word absolutist. Okay, maybe it's not scary to you guys because I bet that half of you are monarchists, but it's some kind of Neo-Absolutism. What even is this? So Neo-Absolutism has a lot of intellectual predecessors in reactionary movements of the past. It takes concepts from people like Sir Robert Filmer, the great Tory absolute monarchist who defended divine right of kings in his book on patriarchy. It takes ideas from Joseph de Maistre, the great Catholic reactionary who wrote polemics against the French Revolution. And it takes ideas from Bertrand de Juvenel, who is an early 20th century thinker who talked about a particular idea of human orders that is pretty unique that is pretty interesting. And Moldbug, actually, if you've ever read Curtis Yarvin, he takes some of those ideas when talking about the political scenarios and political scenes in America. So, all right. So, sorry about that. But probably the place to start with generative. The place to start with Neo-Absolutism is generative anthropology. Now, generative anthropology is I'll post this up here. Share screen. There we go. There. So, generative anthropology. So, generative anthropology is an idea that was sort of floating around in the depths of academia. It's kind of on the fringe, but it's a very interesting idea. And the people behind it are René Girard and Eric Gans. Now, if I remember correctly, Eric Gans is a Catholic, as is René Girard. Now, if you know René Girard, is best known for his work on the violence and the sacred, in which he argues that the concept of sacrifice in religion is extremely important to cultures as a way of controlling man's violent urges. It allows us to find scapegoats by murdering the scapegoat, you're able to satisfy man's natural violent tendencies, without which it would tear apart entire communities. And I also mentioned Rene Girard in my latest video on the skeptics. In that video, I quoted Rene Girard about something called mimetic desire, which we'll get to soon. But for now, what we have to understand about generative anthropology is that it sort of builds onto that framework that that Rene Girard built, and applies it. And instead of applying it to religion, it applies this framework to language, and specifically the origins of language. So my friend Aris Kachi has written several things about several blog posts about this topic. There is a great on his website, the Sympoiesis, and he's kind of hard to read sometimes, I will admit. He kind of needs some sort of he needs an editor, to be honest. That is my gripe with him. He needs a better English editor. I mean, look at this stuff. It doesn't flow. But that's my inner writer talking about. The ideas he expresses here are very important. So what you have to understand about language is that it is intentional. And this is what he says here. A given act is only intelligible with regards to the intention of the agent who makes said act. If you were alone in the forest and the sound of the rustling leaves started sounding like English words, perhaps even an intelligible phrase, say, when the ruler's seat is insecure, the great ministers revolt and the smaller ones pilfer. Unless we were to associate agency to the leaves and the breeze, which would posit that they have intellectual capacities, regardless of this audible construct corresponding to being a fragment of an ancient Chinese wisdom from Li Yun, it would be meaningless. It would just so happen to coincidentally sound like Li Yun, unless the leaves and breeze were somehow not just alive, but intelligent. Word, language, communicative acts, words themselves, are only intelligible with reference to an intentional agent who presents them to us. Otherwise, we must construct our own meaning through interpretation. Right. So what he's trying to say with this sort of deal is that is basically that this kind of postmodern view of language that we should try to get away from this is incorrect, right? The idea of death of the author, deconstructing things and getting away from the text, that sort of deal is misguided at best. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can come up with all kinds of things, but if you just focused on the text itself without looking into the intentions of the author, you're going to wind up with some discrepancies, shall we say. So I mean, this is why Derrida, one of these postmodernist deconstructionist types, sort of horrified by the idea of language. He considered writing to be less totalitarian than speech, given writing's ability to be played with. There's if you have certain forms of communication were basically the linguistic equivalent to fascism. There's no way for democratic interpretation of meaning. It's all a part of, we're all supposed to just understand things from the speaker. We can't just insert our own meanings into the text or let this text speak for itself, as it were. And that's the reason why we have. So that's part of this. We have, in other words, language is rooted in authority. That's the thing. Language, the person who creates the person who speaks has authority over what he means by what he said. And if you want to understand what he meant, you have to go to him and ask him, or else try and see what he's thinking through some other means, right? So that's now that's something. Yeah, I'm seeing based. Yeah, based. Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's the based part of this. Authority is necessary for language. Now, what complicates things is when you get to tradition. Because not every word that is used was invented by the person who uses it, right? They get that language. They get those words from previous authorities, teachers, parents, media conglomerates, and then those people get that language from other authorities, and it goes back and creates this tradition. And so you see that tradition is incredibly important for knowledge, because without tradition, we can't understand a tradition to contextualize these words. We don't even know what the hell we're talking about, which is why the idea of anti-traditionalism is a recipe for epistemic nihilism. And what generative anthropology says is that if you trace these traditions back and back and back and back and back, you eventually arrive at something called the originary scene, in which man first became rational, and the first words were spoken by what is called the big man, which is this kind of central authority of this primitive humanity. This kind of primitive humanity is where language arrived. And language arrived at the same time as society and authority. And you can't really separate these things. Society, authority, language, these are all tradition. These are all intertwined with each other from the start. And that's the key takeaway from generative anthropology. And the ontology. So keep that in mind. The ontology of language is inherently hierarchical and traditional. So how does this apply to politics? That's where we get into something interesting. That's where Neo-Absolutism comes in. And so one of the things that I talked about in a previous live stream is this idea within liberalism that desire is internally generated. Let's see. And this is where I got some of the information from. The myth of self-interest. That's a hell of a title right there. The idea of liberal psychology is that man's nature is inherently self-interested. Typically, the liberal arguments for the creation of social orders first presuppose some version of self-interest as an explanatory efficient cause. That means Basically, think of John Locke's idea of the state of nature. You know, we were all these free and equal individuals in the state of nature, and then we formed a got together and discussed things, formed a social contract that binds us together. Now, this is obviously false in light of generative anthropology, right? Because it assumes that human orders needed to have some kind of cause in like rational discourse, when in fact, as we stated previously, language comes onto the scene as a result of social orders and authority, not the other way around. So we can see where liberalism starts to unravel. And by the way, this is Rene Girard actually stated as much when he started talking about mimetic desire. Mimetic desire, in Rene Girard's view, is this idea that our neighbors are the basis of our desire. And if you want to give an example of this in real life, I'll give you an example in something that happened to me in real life. So I was at my cousin's house, and my cousins have these cute little toddlers, a boy and a girl. I think they're around like 7 and 6 years old, both of them. And they are pretty sweet little kids, I'll say. But they tend to fight a lot. And one of the things that tends to happen with them is that whenever the boy decides he wants something, the girl suddenly decides that she wants it. And not only does she want it, but she wants it because he wanted it. And she'll click. But if you asked her, she says, "Oh, I always wanted that," even though she didn't even care about what the boy wanted like 5 seconds ago, right? She's obviously, the little girl obviously sees that the boy's playing with a ball or something, and decides from that, I want the ball because he's playing with it. Our neighbors are the model of our desires. And what Rene Girard says is that that our ancient ancestors understood this, which is why we had these strict prohibitions on human behavior, much stricter than there are today, because he gives the example of the 10th commandment, which basically is like, thou shalt not covet my neighbor's goods. Right? That's a pretty restrictive commandment. It's basically, unlike the other commandments, it's restricting people's desires, not just their actions, like the other commandments. They're restricting their desires. It's restricting their desires. But this commandment, what it's supposed to prevent these kinds of squabbles from popping up. Because imagine if we didn't have these kinds of restrictions. In that case, every time I got a donkey, my neighbor would decide that I want a donkey, and so that translates into, I want your donkey, and then that creates these kinds of arguments, and this could easily tear apart an ancient society. So we have to get rid of this stuff. We have to sort of we sort of have to get rid of this kind of infighting before it starts. Hence, we have moral restrictions on things. So so this kind of invalidates liberalism, because liberalism would claim that all of our desires are, or at least a lot of our most politically relevant desires, are a result of like some kind of internal sovereign individual. The idea that, if you try to restrict, this is something that I've had liberals come to me and say, if you try to restrict people's freedom, then they'll just then they will naturally try and rebel against you, because the human soul yearns for freedom in a specific Enlightenment liberal sense that was only invented in the 1700s. We're starting to see that sort of thing unravel now, aren't we? I can hear the machines on the other side of the screen. The machines of your brains are starting to wind and see through this. Good, very good, but we're not done yet. So this is what it get, and this is what it gets, and because it gets a lot worse in when we consider the ramifications of this. And this is a great paper in the Journal of Neo-Absolutism by a man named Chris Bond. Max Jerome, if you're in the audience right now, I posted this paper to you and you loved it. And now we're going to share this with my audience. It's called The Patron Theory of Politics. You can look it up. And it basically goes over the implications of this theory of Neo-Absolutism. And Bond's Chris Bond, by the way, his contribution is taking Bertrand de Jouvenel's work and applying it to this framework. And it fits this framework like a glove, because what Bertrand de Jouvenel says is that in every society, there is a high, middle, and a low. You've got a high, this kind of center of power. You've got this center of power that is the sovereign. And then you have the subsidiary powers that are also in society doing things. And then you have the low, which is the periphery. And the idea is that whenever the sovereign is insecure in some way, it will try and war against the subsidiary powers by raising up the periphery against them. And Bond gives the example of how medieval kings, in one of his in his book Nemesis, Bond gives the example of medieval kings, how they would raise up, they would free peasants from serfdom and use them as sort of foot soldiers directly for the interest of the king. Because a free person in medieval society didn't have to serve any lord. He was loyal only to God and the king himself. So that was like a direct foot. Once you freed somebody, that was a direct foot soldier. And what's happened in liberalism is that what happens in liberalism, going all the way back to classical liberalism, is that we see that the center of power is obscured by these words like freedom and rights and equality. You know, when Bertrand de Jouvenel points this out, whenever the state advocates for freedom and equality and stuff like that, what it means is actually we're going to level these subsidiary powers so that you become free persons, which means you become direct foot soldiers of the absolute state. I think a perfect example of this is one example of this is the classical liberal movement to abolish aristocracy and privileges. You know, once you abolish the landed aristocracy, who's left over but the state? You've just given the state the power to get rid of these subsidiary powers, and for what? Freedom? Well, I guess if you don't like aristocrats, that's a pretty good system. But as Bertrand de Jouvenel points out, these absolute states have a lot more power over you than in ancient societies. Medieval kings couldn't forcibly conscript their populations or raise income taxes. Modern states can. All right, so that's something that is to be considered. But what liberalism does, and what modern theories that come after it do, is that they obfuscate power. They say that they pretend as though the center doesn't exist, and while promoting freedom and equality. And all the while, every time you see freedom and equality, these memes of freedom and equality pushed out, that is a sign that one power center is being destroyed while another power center is raising in power, because this power is conserved in a way, and it creates a system that's more and more top heavy. Ironically, absolute monarchy is not as absolute as, in many ways, the modern liberal state. So so you might want to ask, like, how does if you want a modern application of this principle, he has a section in this article called "The Link Between Black Lives Matter and the Anti-Corn Law Movement." And he says, modern scholarship appears to have a great deal of trouble explaining the actions of Prime Minister Robert Peel and the undermining of his own Conservative Party during the anti-Corn Law movement. But with de Juvenel's insight, we have no reason to be confused. The Anti-Corn Laws League was, in effect, a Black Lives Matter movement of the 19th century. Both movements share the same funding pattern, the same organization pattern. They were both movements engaged by power to enact change. Starting with Robert Peel and the Anti-Corn Law League, it is a matter of record that the funding for the activities of the League were key to their existence. It was a pressure movement financed by so-called private sources, that these private sources were the Whig industrialists linked to Parliament that benefited from reorganization of the economic policies of the British government should be cause for pause. The League was not at all a grassroots creation, and was brought into existence by this highly powerful and heavily connected group of people. Again, as with all of these movements, the image passed down to us is one of brave David fighting against the Goliath of less vested interests and oppressive feudal aristocrats, yet the funding figures belie this. And then he goes over how the Anti-Corn Law League got way more funding from industrialists than the pro-Corn Law League got from aristocrats, basically. And Bond actually, as a side note, Bond actually states in his in one of his little essays on his more informal blog, shall we say, that the Anti-Corn Law League and the radical liberals in general, they were basically the frothing at the mouth communists of their era. Like, a lot of them were actually these kinds of agrarian utopians types that said that once we have free trade, we'll have unlimited world peace, and everybody will be able to live on farms, and it'll all be hunky-dory. You see that, and then these people would also go around and smash things to pressure people into supporting their movement. Oh, wow, gee, where did we hear this before? And this is actually a result of liberalism obfuscating power, right? Because if we see it, what's happening is that power can't officially just say, let's reorganize the economy, and then snap its fingers and boom, economy. That's not how liberalism works. It all has to be done informally. So what it does is the truly powerful people in society create something like the Anti-Corn Law League or Black Lives Matter or some other quote-unquote private group. And these private groups then petition the government, petition the very powers that created them, please control us, please give us some stuff, give us Gibbs. And of course, the powers that be, they always wanted to do this. So they're like, of course, yeah, we'll give you Gibbs. And the people on the ground, the Black Lives Matter, and the anarchists in the Anti-Corn Law League, none of those people have to share the ideology of the ruling elite, right? Because the ruling elites of the Anti-Corn Law League, their funders were like these industrialists that wanted to reorganize the economy, the British economy, to support industrialism rather than landed aristocracy. But they were funding anarchists that wanted like agrarian communism. But guess who got what they wanted at the end of the day? That's right, the people who had the money. They got what they wanted. Which is why Black Lives Matter is one of those movements that is going to only be brought up once every 4 years for an election, as Bond actually says in the paper. If we look at the paper, let me scroll down for a second. Let's see. If you look at here, this leaves the question of why BLM movement is being used at this time. And as with the example of Brown versus Board of Education 1954 case, there appears to be a number of overlapping incentives, with the central issue being federal versus state level, yet again, augmented by electoral politics. As the Open Society meeting notes from February 2015 make clear, leaders of hashtag Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives worked to influence candidate platforms during the 2016 primary season. This came alongside the recent acknowledgement by political strategists that African American voters may be more pivotal to the 2016 general election than previously forecasted. And there we go, right? It's not really a mystery why this is happening anymore, right? These crazy people are being allowed to run around smashing things because the people who in power find them useful, and they'll cut the funding as soon as they find them not useful anymore. That's that. If you ever wonder why the United States during the Cold War funded all these communist artists, and you can look this up too. The reason why they did that was because these communists were anti-Soviet. So people like Herbert Marcuse in of the Frankfurt School, and also artists that were like overseas, these people were all anti-Soviet. So the U.S. foreign policy establishment at the time said, well, even though these people are anti-American, they're also anti-Soviet. Well, so we can have these people subvert leftism in these European countries. And they did. And it wasn't really a problem to the Americans, because they're like, well, if they get too big for their britches, we'll just cut the funding. And then bada bang, that's it, right? So that's sort of the problem with liberalism, according to the neo-absolutist view. It's highly informalized, and this informal style of rule generates chaos, as you could see through the activities of Black Lives Matter. Whereas if we had an absolute monarch, and the absolute monarch said, "Let there be let us help Black people," and then snap his fingers, boom, it'll be done like that. Or else, because we wouldn't really have to have this kind of roundabout way of doing things. It could just be done and over with. And there are many other examples of this throughout history. There's the Protestants, or the Protestant Reformation. A lot of the secular princes, they supported the Protestant Reformation because the Catholic Church was a major political power at the time, and they wanted to centralize power to themselves. So they promoted people like Martin Luther, who said that the secular rulers are the absolute authorities on earth. You also, the civil rights movement of the 1960s, as Bond said previously, this was an effort to undermine state authorities, particularly the authorities of southern states that were being ornery and not listening to their northern masters, so to speak. Modern human rights, the idea of universal human rights, that is used to undermine non-liberal dictatorships and non-liberal regimes around the world, as well as Republicans at home. Like that's etc. Right? And this is none of it. What you have to understand is that none of this is like conspiracy theory nonsense, right? These people, if you read their texts, they openly acknowledge that what they're doing is this, right? They'll usually paper it over with some kind of ideological stuff, but when you get down to the nuts and bolts of what they're doing, this is what they're doing, and you can understand why. And this is the Patron theory of politics. The Patron theory of politics is basically that to understand why a movement is doing something, you have to look at what the intentions of their patrons. It's similar to how you need to understand the author to understand the words of a written text. You need to understand the people with money before you can understand the movements on the ground and why they exist. And this applies to everything. Literally everything has to have a patron in order for it to be popular. Because it seems obvious to us, because we don't buy into this idea of the liberal free market of ideas. But in order for certain ideas to gain popularity, you have to promote them. And the only way you can promote them is if you have power. Because what power allows you to do is to direct the attention of several individuals to a certain point. And again, we're hearkening back to generative anthropology here. What the big man at the originary scene of at the beginning of human society did to form language is that he pointed to something and said "ugh," and that was the first word, and everybody knew, and everybody could see and see the whatever he was pointing at and associate that with the sign of "ugh," and that was the birth of language. And politics in culture, in the different ideas that float around, are just more complex elaborations on that. The powers that be use money to promote ideas and memes all around the world, to the point where someone like Royal Endeavor, for example, will point out that now in Budapest there's Black Lives Matter riots there. Why? Well, it's very useful for their it's useful for undermining the government of that country, Hungary, and in favor of the international community at large. So by raising up blacks as a kind of periphery class, the international community is able to attack subsidiary powers that threaten its security, like Hungary. So you can see that this is just has this widespread application. So now that we have the application, the application of the rule, the question remains. So then, how do we use this? Now, what Chris Bond says is that, you know, first we have to understand from the conservative perspective, what we would ultimately want to do is stop this kind of releveling process and begin some kind of decentralization. We have to, and to do this, we'd have to make the center secure, formalize it in some way, so that it wouldn't just be all about rampant leveling and just and start say, for instance, it won't be just leveling things at random, and instead it would start to tolerate certain subsidiary structures, and we wouldn't have as much chaos then. All right. So Bond would say that one of the things we would need to do is to sort of lean into centralization. A right wing that promoted centralization in the short term as a means of securing things, that would definitely be a right wing that would in theory it would gain patrons to support it, and then once we were to enact this, then we could start and get into power. We could start decentralizing things so that we can life can be life will be better off for all of us. Another thing that we can do to subvert this is just by pointing this out, right? Spreading the idea of neo-absolutism and similar things like it is important, because what we would need to do is essentially by pointing out this thing, by pointing out this structure, pointing out that there are rulers and that they are telling people what to do, that is in itself subversive of liberalism, because liberalism depends on informal rule. This is, and it goes insane, and liberals go insane if you try and tell them otherwise. Like, just thinking about, to give a recent example of this, think of the Great Reset and how you have people, you can't parody this. People like Klaus Schwab are out there saying, we're going to have this great reset and reset all of our political communities and stuff. And meanwhile, the ADL is saying, this is a evil right-wing conspiracy theory nonsense. You know, because to them, just to point out that there are rulers doing things, and that is in itself a conspiracy theory. And, you know, epistemologically speaking, there is in theory a difference between conspiracy theories and like the flat earth stuff, and just pointing out that there are people in charge of things, and that liberalism is false when it says that there can be these kinds of grassroots sort of things that are just spring out of the aether. All right. So I think that just about wraps this up for this stream. Charlemagne, you said that, wow, this is the quick take. It's 45 minutes. Yeah, that's normal for my quick takes. That's normal for my quick takes. Maybe I should start renaming these live streams something other than quick takes, because yeah, that's kind of weird that my rant. Maybe I should just call it rants. But what do you guys think? Rants? Should I call these things rants rather than quick takes? I call them quick takes because they come to me at the spur of the moment, and I just speak off the cuff. All right. I can't believe I got a lot of people on here tonight, and I'm very happy for that. I never expected to get this many people. I never expected to get 9 people. I know it's kind of sad, but hey, what can you do? What I will say is maybe I can spend these last 10 minutes just going over what I talked about in my original version of in Quick Takes number 3 on Neo-Absolutism. So in that live stream, what I was talking about, I was talking about something, it was a video by the Distributist at the time, and it was about New Atheism. It's called New Atheism is Boring and You Should Stop. And in that video, he went over the idea of New Atheism and the reasons behind it. And it was a pretty good video, but I had to disagree with something that he said at the end of it. And here's the crux of what he said. So you can see this. This is the concept that he talks about in the video, called homie, human, ontological, and moral innocence. Homie is the idea that humans, when stripped of their of influence from institutions and moral systems, tend by their nature towards rational thought, calm discourse, and moral action in a way that produces ordered liberty, prosperity, and equality. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of overlap between homie and the kinds of ideas of the Enlightenment, this kind of state of nature deal where, mankind starts out as a rational but self-centered being in a state of nature, and out of self-interest we come to form society. As we said before, this is obviously false thanks to generative anthropology, but why is this being promoted? Why is this idea of homie being promoted? Now, Distributist says that it's popular because it's that this thing is very seductive. The idea of homie, of living without rules, is very seductive, and he appeals to the idea of our fallen human nature, that we want to we want to live without rules. The idea of living without rules sounds nice, and so it's inherently seductive, this idea of homie. But I guess the problem I would have with this theory is that there are a lot of bad ideas that sound seductive, but aren't being promoted right now. So why is this particular bad idea? Why this particular bad idea? And the answer is because people with power want this idea to be bad. So Distributist would say that this idea promotes deconstructivism in the name of creating utopia. But for the people in power promoting this idea, for the patrons of this atheist movement, this progressive movement, the deconstructing is kind of the point. Because when you have a justification to deconstruct society, that's just a green light for the center to bulldoze subsidiary powers that threaten it. like for instance, Christian churches. You can destroy using homie. You can undermine the authority of Christian churches, subvert them from the inside, and enforce and hollow them out so that they promote progressive ideas that the state wants them to, and thereby the state the state increases its power that way. And so you see, the deconstruction is the entire point of it. The people on the ground might be attracted to it because they like the utopia at the end of the deconstruction rainbow. But the people promoting this idea, the deconstruction is the entire point, because it allows them to consolidate more power to themselves. Let's see. That's it. So that's all that I would have to say on that. That was a good 5 minutes of sort of going through this. Now I'm going to go through comments and see what they have to say on this, right? So Charlemagne says, if I recall correctly, Neo-Absolutism remains too obsessed with deconstructing liberalism, which is honestly just a waste of time, in my opinion, an excess of political theory on an anti-Enlightenment sovereignty. Abstract political theory that has nothing to do with the world as it is of little interest to me these days. Well, that's... I suppose that's true to a certain extent, but I think, as we've demonstrated in this video, there's a lot we can learn about from Neo-Absolutism, and it provides some ideas of what we can do going forward too. Because it identifies the problem in a way that allows us to move forward with some general idea of what we're supposed to be doing as a positive action. For example, and more importantly, it tells us that why certain actions would fail and others would succeed. For example, these kinds of grassroots conservative protests, unless you get a very powerful patron, you're not going to succeed in overriding this, because Donald Trump by himself is not going to save America. I'd love to do an entire video on why I don't think Donald Trump is going. Why Donald Trump ever had a chance of being the savior of America, and what would have had to have happened in order for Donald Trump to fix the problems that we're trying to solve. Charlemagne, what I would say to Charlemagne, though, is that right now we are at a stage in the development of the dissident right in which we haven't really a lot of solid intellectual foundations. And part of the reason for that is the lack of these kinds of intellectual types. We don't have a lot of intellectuals coming in and filling our institutions and talking about these sorts of things. We would need to do things like that. I think things like Imperium Press are important for that reason, and I hope to see more good stuff coming out of them, and more good stuff coming out of the dissident right in general. I honestly think that, again, we need something solid to work with before we can start moving forward in a kind of action-oriented way. Because I think I think that's what we lack. But maybe, I don't know about you, maybe that's my bias as an intellectual type. I don't see I don't see from where we are a path to power through the kind of direct action that is advocated by certain people like Nick Fuentes or the America First crowd. I don't see a path from that kind of direct action to us getting into power in solving the problem, right? So anyway, I hopefully we can. I hopefully I've given my best explanation of what this thing called Neo-Absolutism is, why it's important, and I hope that Charlemagne, I hope that you're correct in saying that we have everything we need to fix these problems. Because if we do, that'd be great. But again, I'm kind of black-pilled on that issue. I don't think that direct paths to power are feasible right now. I think what we would need to do, and this is what I've always been concentrated on, is we would need to consolidate the kinds of intellectuals online and start organizing them into something like I kind of cringe. It sounds kind of cringe, but we would need to organize them into a kind of counter university of sorts. But that's neither here nor there. I hope that you guys all had a great time. I entertained at least 9 of you, so that's good. And I hope to see you next time. Next time, I might do a live stream on Donald Trump for my next quick take. And I also want to do a live stream interview for the Geoconservative Files on January 11th with Elliot of Renaissance Man. All right. Well, I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good night, everybody.